Have you ever had a spotty plant? So a plant that looks like it's actually got spots like you might get on your face. Or have you had a plant where you're looking at the leaves, usually the back of the leaves, and you're just like, why is there water trapped in the back of that? Stick around with me and let's dive into the topic of plant edema. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So for today's topic, I wanted to dive into something that I wished I could have found online when I was first starting on my houseplanting journey, because I could find very little information as to what this was, what it looked like, what was the different ways that it could kind of look like in different plants, and what to do to treat it. So this is an entire video on plant edema, and I will show you a couple of examples of what this might look like in your plants. So the first example I want to show you is this philodendron. It's a philodendron, Memo. It's not a ficus. Philodendron splendid. And I will bring up this leaf so you can kind of see. I'll hide my face. Can you see that dark zone in that leaf where you can kind of almost see that, ooh, there is flooding of water? And let me show you what it looks like in the front. You can kind of see that discoloration that is happening there. This is a very old leaf, but you can kind of see what's happening there. Now, ta-da! That's what it might look like in the front as well, because this plant had edema, but it had edema, instead of it being at the back where it was like filled with water, it was in the front. I've also got another image, and let me show you that image here, of what one of the leaves of this specific plant, which is a very traditional way of what an edema might look like in a plant, where it looked like a water-filled blister. And you might be able to kind of look at some of this. I've got two images. One I think was one that had popped, and one is when it was full. And hopefully I think I've got a picture of a side view where you can kind of see it. It's like a water-filled balloon. That is what edema could look like. The other example, and it usually has got it, so let me see if I can bring it up and show you. Oh my God, shocking. Shocking, 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 shocking. For the people that have been here for a while, my dragon scale alocasia, which has always suffered from edema, has not got a single leaf. Not a single leaf with edema. OMG. That has never happened in the past. So, yeah. 3 cheers for me that I managed to do that after 6 years of owning this plant. It's still looking really busted. But I can say that this is still kept it alive. It's much smaller than when I first bought it. This is still the original plant that I got of the alocasia, beginda, the dragon scale alocasia. The green one, I've always had this. Oh no, you might be able to see that's old edema there. This is not new, but can you see that slight yellowing on the leaf there? That was edema that had happened at some point, but it doesn't have any edema markings in the back. Oh, shocking. But you might be asking yourself, what is edema? And edema is something that is sometimes, I think it originally is a medical term, and it might be an ancient Greek word, but it's not something that we have, at least that I can think of, that's also been translated or is used in modern Greek as well. If it is an ancient Greek word, I will put here what it means. And it's probably very closely linked to what it looks like in kind of humans and in plants. Because edema is something, I think you can get edemas, I want to say on just your legs, but I think you can get it anywhere on your skin. I might be wrong. But it also happens to plants. And in plants, it is a physiological kind of appearance of what is essentially, and this is where it gets really vague, and this is the information that I could find when I was first starting off, which is an imbalance of water. Does that clarify it for you? Because it didn't for me when I was first looking into what in hell this thing was on my plants. So bear that in mind, that with plant edema, it is basically a physical appearance on the plant, usually on the leaves, usually at the back of the leaves is usually where you'll get, how many times did I just say usually? It's where you'll get that kind of bubbling of water that will happen, and the examples are there for you to see. I'll hopefully have images of what both versions of edema could look like as pictures so you can kind of see what I mean. Now, the one thing that I will hasten to add here is that plant edema is not a bacterial or a fungal issue, because a lot of people might think that it is. It's not related to either fungus or bacteria. This is something that the plant will do itself. So think about it. It's not quite the same thing, because it's probably closer if I relate it to a human edema, but again, edema isn't something that a lot of people have probably seen on another human. It's not that common of a condition, but think of it like I don't even want to say a cyst or a spot on a human, because that's usually caused by some form of an infection, but it kind of is something that could happen at any time if the conditions are met correctly. So think of it more like dry skin. So if it's the winter time and it's really, really, like you're always in really dry conditions in a house because your heating is on and you're always going out in the freezing cold, usually that's when a lot of people tend to get dry skin, even people that don't normally have dry skin. So do you see what I mean? It's something that could happen at any given time to anybody or any plant if the conditions are met correctly. So that imbalance of water. But again, let's look at the close-up images that I've got on the screen right now. You can kind of see that it can present itself in two very distinct ways, and it can also progress into a third form, and hopefully I've got an image down below of what it can look like when it's past. Remember, we were looking at the alocasia just a moment ago where it had that kind of yellowing on there as well. So with a plant edema, it's that it could come up as a water-filled kind of sac within the leaf. It could just be that the leaf, the back of the leaves are kind of flooded, and then if you haven't caught it and not seen it, you might then see that discoloration that happens on the leaf front side at that point from that edema having been there. Now, before anybody asks, can you pop a spot? Yes. However, much like a spot that you might get on your face, at that point it is a closed environment if there's a water-filled kind of sac within that leaf. If you then break that open, there is more of a chance that you might get bacteria going in or funguses and all of these things, much like if you're popping a spot on a face. There's a reason why a lot of people are just like, don't do it. Don't do it, because you're going to introduce things into an area that really doesn't need things introduced to it. So it's very similar in that respect to popping a spot. But then you might also see, when you're looking at how it could kind of look after it's been kind of been and done, essentially, is you could see something like that, where even on the back, kind of, if I hide myself, maybe it might show up, you can kind of see that it might have had flooding of water that was happening there, and that's why the discoloration will happen. You might get a slightly coarser texture on there, so there are going to be signs for you to see. And this is very different from leaf yellowing, because a lot of the times if you're getting yellowing on leaves, it would be the entire leaf. With this, it tends to be not the entire leaf, but like, for instance, the leaf that I was showing you before, which has got that flooding there, at least in my experience, it tends to be on the margins of the leaves. So either right at the bottom where the tip is, where a lot of the times you might get, why am I blocking now? I will find the word, where you get your plants that they drip off the tip, basically. Guttation. There we go, that's a word. Guttation. So it would either be right at the tip, or I always find that it will be around the margins of the leaf. So that's been my experience, at least. So those are going to be the places that you want to keep an eye out for it. But as I was saying, it is more common on the undersides. You do occasionally get it on the top side of the leaf, and the image of the bubbly edema that I took like from one of my plants, it was the same plant actually, is one that I could see on both sides, obviously, because it was kind of quite full. But I am here to tell you it is not a pest issue and it is not a fungal or bacterial thing. Get that out of your mind right now and stop worrying about that at least. Honourable mention here, and I've not had it happen to me yet. Don't mean it's not gonna happen, so I don't have an image. If I find one online, I'll see if I can put it here. But you can also get edema in succulent type plants, not just your foliage type plants, but succulent type plants. I don't know an awful lot because I've not had to deal with it. It was difficult enough to find any information on foliage plants and edema. I don't even want to attempt to look at what it might be for the succulents. I might be wrong, it might be super easy to find that. But I'd be curious with that because an imbalance of water for a succulent, the edema might be the least of your worries at that point because potentially you might have dealt or you might be dealing with root rot that you haven't seen just yet. So bear that in mind, but if you've had experience with edema on a succulent type plant, a cactus or more succulent like type house plants, do let us all know down below what it looks like, what you kind of did to deal with it, and did you have any root rot? I'm very curious. What is it? What is an edema exactly? In the simplest of terms, it is that imbalance of water that I was talking about where the plant absorbs a lot of water super fast, and what causes that is that it cannot expel that water fast enough. And by expel, I mean usually it'd be through transpiration. So the water just sits there. So can you imagine it'd be that kind of like this gush of water coming into those leaves, and there's no way of releasing it, so it would just build pressure, and then that's what creates that liquid-filled sac or the type of flooding that you might see inside of the leaf cells. It is that kind of bursting out. So that's the simplest way that I can kind of explain it. And the cells can overfill, they can swell, and they can also burst themselves. So that is something that you need to remember. And then they will go through that hardening stage where you might get looks in the leaves like that, or you might get a leaf that will eventually, this leaf, about that much of it down below was edema, and it basically the plant is just going to sacrifice a leaf. And I can actually tell you just by touching this top bit that's just yellow is the kind of texture that I would expect it. This edema part down below is a lot more rough, if that makes sense. So it is the way of the plant kind of like dealing with the edema. So the most common causes of plant edema are three. Three are the main culprits. So overwatering, high humidity, and very poor airflow. And it makes sense because remember what I was just talking about before. It happens because the plant cannot transpire fast enough with that much water coming in. So overwatering would cause that surge of water too quickly into the plant. The fact that the humidity level is very high around the plant, so think if you've got it somewhere that's got really high humidity, like a bathroom or even the glass IKEA cabinets or a grow tent or anything like that, or a terrarium, there is the way that the leaves would transpire. And if I'm not mistaken, transpiration happens when it's the exchange of gases, but also a lot of that water is released through vapors into the atmosphere. If there is, oh my God, and this is getting really kind of like high school science, if there is a high volume of water happening because it's humid around the plant, and there's a high volume of water trying to get out, it can't get anywhere because there's no differential between the volume of moisture here and the volume of moisture outside. If it was very dry, it would immediately or much better be able to kind of expel some of that moisture through that kind of vaporization that would happen in terms of the water coming out whilst the plant cells are transpiring, releasing oxygen, exchanging gases. So yeah. Trying to not get too scientific because I know sometimes it goes over people's heads, but some of this is needed for something like edema. And airflow, same issue with airflow. And this is how I can avoid in my space, which is very high humidity, and I tend to be an overwaterer, as to my plants not getting edema. So this plant actually doesn't sit in here normally, it sits in my kind of kitchen area, which doesn't have high humidity, believe it or not. It's not my kitchen area, it's the kind of bit that I sit to have like dinners and lunches, so it's further away from like the humid bits of the kitchen. And as I was saying, obviously that one alocasia, it would happen all the time regardless of where it was. But I don't generally get an awful lot of edema in this space. And again, think about my space in here, high humidity and overwater, fans. I have got fans going all the time because again, think about it. If the leaf is transpiring, so that exchange of gases, and there is air moving around, even if there's high humidity, it will move those gases out. So it means, do you see what I mean? It's like what's coming out will move, what's coming out will move because there's airflow happening. I don't know how much better I can describe that, but hopefully that makes sense. The other thing that could cause plant edemas is slight kind of like sudden changes to its environment. So, for instance, going from something that is very, very high humidity, like in here, to very dry conditions, or from very dry conditions somewhere else in the house to somewhere that is very, very humid. Another change that could cause is sudden changes in light levels. So suddenly something that was getting an awful lot of light, so for instance what started causing this to have edema was the change of the season. So all of a sudden, same window, same location where it's getting, but it gets beat down with light, probably more than it should be getting in the summer months, and then all of a sudden the winter and the autumn comes and it doesn't get anywhere near as much light. So those lower light levels affect transpiration rates, so then it means that the plant was still absorbing everything, but there wasn't enough light there to cause enough transpiration to happen on the leaves, thus causing the edemas. Another thing as well, this is like a laundry list of things that could happen, and some of these things you're not going to be able to control, and I think that's going to be ultimately something that I want to touch on at the very end, but it is that fluctuation of temperature. So, and I'm surprised again that it hasn't happened in here. So massive temperature drops at night versus really, really high temperatures during the day. That difference in temperature can also cause issues when it comes to plant edemas. And something that probably makes sense, it links into kind of the overwatering, poor kind of soil conditions, or very, very compacted soil. Again, it kind of means that the watering is going to be the one thing that's going to be causing you the issue there, that kind of, it all ties into that level of overwatering. So how about some tips about how you can prevent edema? Prevention is better than cure. So first thing is let the plant soil level go slightly dry before you water. Not necessarily bone dry, but slightly dry is kind of the normal way that you would need to plant to dry out before you water. So if your situation is you're getting this happening to your plant, but you let it go bone dry, maybe don't let it go quite so dry and water a bit earlier than you normally would. Or if you're watering all the time and it's constantly wet, maybe you need to let it dry out a bit, maybe not going towards bone dry, but a happy medium is probably what you need to be looking at there. Then you also need to be looking at things like well-draining soil. So remember what I was talking about before about compaction? You need to make sure that there's a lot of kind of air able to go into the soil and something that drains a lot faster. And I've said this before, don't just assume because a certain type of plant soil mix is kind of pushed towards one specific type of plant. So I'll give you an example. I have tried tropical plant mixes and even my anthurium plant mixes for some things like my Hoyas, and they've done okay, but it's struggled a bit because that still stayed a bit too wet for a bit too long for how little roots was in the plants that I was putting into that soil media. I then moved my Hoyas into a succulent soil mix, meant for cactuses and succulents. They are loving life, but it's not meant, theoretically, it's not pushed towards the Hoyas, so things like that could help you. So don't just go on the standards. If you see that your plant is getting this all the time and you've given it what you think is the best soil, maybe give it something that's even more free draining and then judge it from there. You might need to water a bit more frequently, but it might give you that ultimate level of control that you're kind of missing. And the big one here as well, which is a really easy one to control, Water in the mornings. So the reason why it's better in this case to water in the morning, and generally I will tend to prefer to water in the morning, I think a lot of us do, is because you're giving that plant the chance of the entire day of sun, heat, airflow if you've got it near windows and it might be the summer or anything like that, to transpire in order to kind of get rid of some of that excess moisture. So it's always a better idea if your plants have been struggling with something like edema, try, and this is the easiest thing you could do, try watering them earlier on in the day. Make sense? So if you're getting a lot of edema but you're the kind of person that only ever waters in the evening, that might also be what's causing the issue. Try watering a bit earlier. I know it might not be appropriate for everybody because, for instance, if you are the kind of person that your work hours kind of require you to water at a certain time, that might be the challenging thing, but you can get automatic watering systems that are not that expensive these days, and they can potentially do that for you. Another easy thing, especially in really humid situations, think of your IKEA glass cabinets, or even me in the conservatory here, airflow, get some fans going, move that air around. Again, remember we were talking about it will help with kind of moving some of that transpiration along, and it can transpire a bit easier, thus getting rid of that excess water that it's kind of absorbed a bit too quickly. Linking on to some of the other issues that we were talking about before, try to keep your temperature, if you can, a bit more stable. I mean, I've done relatively, it's not huge differences actually, if I'm being honest. It goes from 20 degrees to 21 degrees in the winter during the day here to like maybe 15, 16 degrees Celsius at night. So that's maybe not too drastic of a change, but if I was getting much more drastic changes in temperature, that'd be something that I'd need to control a bit more kind of closely. What I'm saying is you don't have to just make sure 100% of the time that your entire place is at 20 degrees Celsius day and night. It might not be quite as comfortable for you in the evenings, it might be a bit too hot. So get something that works for the plant, but also don't forget that you live in that space as well. I say this, it might sound silly, but I say this for reasons. You also live in your house, it's not just your plants, don't forget that. Another one is increase light levels, maybe move it closer to a window, put it underneath a grow light. Again, this will help with transpiration. These are really simple little adjustments that you could do to kind of address and prevent that edema from happening. Now the big question that a lot of people are going to be asking is, can you fix edema? The simple answer is no, not in the way that you're thinking. So it's not something like a pest that you can kill the pest and then it's done. It's more of a prevention rather than a treatment. So if you've got a leaf that's already got the blister or it's got that kind of water flooding, guess what? There ain't no reversing that. Those cells have died. The ones that were the blister, the ones that are flooded, or they're kind of getting to that point, they've already burst. Like you cannot, there's no reversing that. The floodgates have been opened, it's done. So it's more about prevention rather than anything else to not get that plant to that level. Now what will happen is that yellowing, that leaf will start yellowing and it potentially drop off, but if you've address some of those other issues, it's not the end of the world. It's not the plant isn't always going to have this. As long as you address some of those issues that we were talking about before, the high humidity, get some airflow, all of these things, light levels, all of these things will help so that the rest of the leaves do not get edema. So you can kind of see this older leaves don't have edema. This other new leaf doesn't have edema. It's fine. It's not something that you're going to be stuck with it for life. Just adjust, but be aware that you're probably going to lose that leaf or it's going to look a bit rough and ready for a while before it eventually kind of drops off, because the plant realizes that if there's too much significant damage that's done on that leaf, there is no point of supporting it and using valuable resources to keep that leaf rather than just rejecting it and focusing on kind of top growth of the plant. As I said, you can remove some of these leaves. Predominantly it's for aesthetics, it won't harm the plant, and obviously try to avoid popping the spot if possible. But let's come into some final thoughts with this one. So remember, always you live in the same space as your plants do, so if you're going to adjust things, adjust them, but for both of you to live comfortably, if that makes sense. You getting edema on the plant doesn't mean that you have failed, it just means that something might just need a bit of tweaking, plants will also get edema sometimes in nature as well. Like if you search for plant edema pictures, you will get a lot of plants images that have got edema for a lot of garden plants or stuff that's outside. It doesn't mean that you're doing something necessarily wrong, it just means that it might need a bit of an adjustment. So don't come down too hard on yourself. Also remember, it's not bacterial or fungal, so you can't control it in that way. You will lose the leaves at some point eventually, or they might look really rough and ready. Of that leaf that has got the edema, there is no fixing it. You can remove the leaves, but it is not necessarily, it's pretty much just for aesthetic reasons that you would be doing it. But yeah, hopefully that makes edema a bit clearer for everybody as to what it is. It's just the plant going, got all this water in me, but I can't expel it, so I will swell up. But not all is lost. You can fix the issue. There just needs to be those little kind of tweaks that I mentioned. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.